Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, welcome back. Chase Thomas podcast, taping this on a Thursday night. First timer over at theringer.com, a very good website that you should go check out today if you are not already, but if you're a fan of the show, you know all about the Ringer and the wonderful NBA writers that they employ, like Howard Beck now joining the fold, friend of the pod, Howard Beck, and now we got Rob Mahoney on here of the Ringer. How long have you been at the Ringer now, Rob?
God, great question. It's been 4-ish years, I think.
Wow.
Time flies, a pandemic in between certainly speeds things up a little bit.
It is weird to think about, too, because I was, obviously I was a Grantland guy way back in the day, and then we're all ESPN True Hoop Network guys from even further back in the day when I first started reading you, which was, I don't want to date her. Let's just not date ourselves and how long that actually was.
No one has to know.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with 82 Seconds of Hell, 82 Feet of Hell. What was the San Antonio Spurs one, and then the basketball one? Because you had Jason Gallagher who did Baller Ball, I want to say.
Yeah.
That was what
48 Minutes of Hell is the Spurs blogger.
There it is, 48 Minutes of Hell. That's what it was. Yeah, and hopefully those all just keep. I would, if I would just maybe this is a pitch to Bill, Rob, is just reintroduce it. Let's bring it all back. Let's just get the blogs back and have a little subset of that because I miss those. Those were all great. There was so much great writing there.
It was a good time. Now, for now, they're just stuck in the Wayback Machine for someone to, some archivist to dig up one of these days.
Absolutely. Rob, I want to start here because I think this is like one of those questions that I've been rattling around a lot the first couple weeks of the NBA season. And it's never good when you see the report of, hey, Alex Caruso and the Bucks make a lot of sense. And this is something that could really jumpstart this season. And it hasn't really gone well out of the gate here for Damian Lillard and company. Giannis is out here feuding with officials at the early point of the year, getting tossed for crazy stuff. And Chris Middleton, we'll see. I have my doubts about where it's going to be 7 months from now and if he still has all-star in him for a 2-month stretch and what lies ahead there. But I don't know. I ask you as someone who covers this game extremely well, Rob, do they have a wing problem, or is there more to what's going on with the Bucks right now out of the gate?
There's definitely more to it, but the wing problem is a great place to start. And I think the hope, the pie in the sky hope, if you're in Milwaukee, is that yes, you have a wing problem now, but between Chris Middleton ramping up from his 20-minute limit at present, developing some of the younger guys on the roster who could fill that spot, and as you allude to with Alex Caruso, maybe bringing in one more veteran wing. Maybe by April, you hope you don't have a wing problem. But I don't know how you could look at the Milwaukee Bucks as currently constructed and say, that's a team that has their wing rotation really figured out, because it's a bit of a disaster. And admittedly, much less of one when Chris Middleton is on the floor, right?
Yeah.
They've been good when he's out there, especially in terms of the flow of their offense, his production. He looks like himself offensively, but defensively, this is not the kind of Bucks team we're used to.
What have you seen, technically? Is it just personnel, or why is it just different coaching? What's been the biggest shift from what you've seen from the Bucks over the last couple of years to this year?
I would say, dramatically different style of coaching, for one, going from Mike Budenholzer to Adrian Griffin. And in a way where I can't say I see what Adrian Griffin sees in the decisions he's making in terms of the style that this team came out of the gate playing defensively, in terms of some of the ways he's tried to piece things together and adjust on the fly. I'm not necessarily tracking why those things make sense. And I think the players, you can see it in their effort and some of their confusion too, in terms of what are we running? Why are I think there's a couple things happening. One, this team is a little bit too old and too slow to play any kind of hyper aggressive defensive style right now. And then just kind of going back to the old drop that they used to have doesn't quite work either, because they don't have the same personnel they used to have. There's actually been a significant amount of turnover in some of these role player spots. Yeah. Not to mention, Middleton, as we've said, on a limit, Giannis in and out of the lineup, Brook Lopez a year older. There aren't a lot of easy answers. And a lot of the players you brought in, whether it's Damian Lillard or Malik Beasley or whoever you want to look at, these aren't great defenders. These aren't even necessarily replacement level defenders. So the Bucks have a lot to figure out between now and the playoffs. So, the good news is the high-end talent is as high as you'll find anywhere in the league. And there's a lot of confidence in that alone, but there's going to have to be some real problem solving, and that's a lot to put at the feet of a first-year head coach.
What's the option then? You talked about the drop and some of the stuff that's different. Like, you can't be hyper aggressive with this older unit. Like,
Yeah.
what is the solution there? How did they become a top 10 defense again with their current personnel? Or is that even not possible?
I think it's possible, but you're going to be more on the fringes of that top 10 versus the Bucks teams of years past were, top 3, top 5 half-court
Right.
defenses, if not overall defenses. This one is going to have to be a little different. It's going to probably have to be an elite offensive outfit that ends up in the 8 to 12 range defensively to really contend. I still think it hews a little bit more conservative in terms of the coverage on a full-time regular season basis, right? It's still going to have to be a good amount of drop because that's where Brook Lopez is going to be most effective, and he's such an important member of your team right now. I think a lot of this stuff resolves itself if you find ways to compensate in transition. Milwaukee is just getting blitzed with teams running against them. And if they can balance their floor a little bit more effectively, especially again with some of these wings, with some of these guards, with some of these new players they brought in, that'll go a long way. Because right now what it looks like is a lot of crashing around the basket, and then Campaign is your only guy going the other way trying to stop a 3-on-1 fast break, and that is a fool's errand, my friend.
I mean, maybe that's the option of like why Caruso makes a lot of sense is you have him in those spots and you don't have to play Campaign. Like maybe that, but I mean, how much does Alex Caruso, let's say he is the guy and he's not ending up in the Lakers or somewhere else in the next couple of months? Because it does seem like the Bulls are heading towards a massive sell-off here with, I mean, Patrick Williams has popped up, Caruso's popped up, DeRozan's popping up, Zach LaVine, obviously. It's never good when like it's never good when you have a players-only meeting after the first game. So that's probably issue number one there. But does he actually move the needle, and does he fit with the main three, and does he fit next to Dame potentially in close games late?
Oh, definitely moves the needle, definitely fits with what they have. I think in particular his ability to guard across. I think 1 through 3 is a primary defender, but even when Caruso gets mismatched against a 4 or 5 with some size, he's so pesky. He's so good at jumping entry passes into the post and things like that, fighting on rebounds. You can get away with him in a lot of different spots. I think he's kind of the budget version of the defender that you might plausibly be able to afford. The problem is how plausibly, because Milwaukee is way over leveraged in its picks that are already out the door, right? They give up 4 second-round picks just to get Jay Crowder, if I remember correctly. That doesn't feel great, especially with Jay Crowder also injured right now out of the lineup. Yeah. So adding to Milwaukee's wing problem. But whatever the disaster scenario is in Chicago, I think Milwaukee needs to be at the front of the line for those conversations. You want Caruso, you're aiming for Caruso. He's such a great fit in terms of what he could be for this team defensively. But even if you can't get him, former Buck Javon Carter could be a good get for this team. Torrey Craig is a wing who could make sense for this team. You don't have to necessarily have the perfect solution, but right now they need any kind of solution. And so even if they can't get Caruso, I think there's other options for them there in the Bulls fallout.
Do you have a really hard conversation with Giannis about Chris Middleton? Do you just say, look, we got to get him. We're going to have to play the minutes restrictions off. We're going to hope he plays at an all-star level for a couple months, and then we have to move him because the wheels are falling off, and I don't think we can win a title with this depth on the wing. And it's just, I understand you love him. You want a title with him. But if you're coming back, we know you're coming back for the next couple of years. That decision's coming down the pike, whether you want to admit it or not. Because Chris Middleton's not going to be your third co-star 3 years from now. I think the writing's on the wall, right? So maybe get out ahead of it. But I also don't know what's Chris Middleton's trade value right now.
This is the problem, and it's you have Dame and Giannis. Yep. But once you move beyond them in terms of okay, what else can this team offer in a trade to resolve all of these issues we're talking about? Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez in particular are just more valuable to the Bucks than they're going to be to almost any other team. And then beyond them, it's do you move Bobby Portis for another wing? Okay, that, you can have that conversation, but what team is throwing you an elite defensive wing or high-level two-way wing in exchange for a big? At this stage in the game, who are the teams out there that have glaring needs for a power, a power with a little bit of finesse rebounding energy center who's probably best served coming off the bench? And that is not a long list of candidates. So I think you have those conversations, but the realistic turn to all of them is, are you really going to move Chris Middleton for, maybe 1 to 2 role players who we all know in our heart of hearts are not as effective as even Middleton is now? We're just kind of selling, you're getting a couple of quarters on the dollar, even for your already injured veteran player who's kind of important to the structure of this team right now.
I mean, me being a big Hawks guy, it is funny to think about because I think DeJounte and Trey are playing a lot better than I thought. Like Quinn Snyder's just the guy's just the guy cranks out regular season wins. He just knows what he's doing in the regular season and the rotations and everything else. But I'm like, I'll never be a big DeAndre Hunter guy, or I'm never going to be like, yeah, that's been great. I've really enjoyed this experience.
We have this in common.
Yeah, like it's just not pleasant. The trading up for him and it's just I can go down a whole rabbit hole there. And then you have AJ Griffin, who's obviously buried in the depth chart here. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know, like maybe it's something like AJ and DeAndre Hunter for Chris Middleton, where if you're the Hawks, you're like, hey man, the clock's ticking with Trey anyway. I don't think we're missing out on a generational talent if we were to flip a couple wings of this group. Maybe it's Sadiq Bey, who they didn't pick up his option earlier. Maybe you do something like that where it helps the Bucks a lot more in terms of just getting them a little bit more depth in the wing, and then the Hawks just get more top end, like best case scenario where it's like you're kind of in that mold anyway, where you're the clock's ticking, you're committed to DeJounte, you're committed to Trey. I mean, you just locked up Onyeka Okongwu. Jalen Johnson's going to be your cheap fifth guy for a little bit. Maybe that's what you roll with and just see what that looks like in the playoffs, where Chris definitely won't have a lot of pressure on him in a DJ Trey Young situation where it's like, hey, and you're like, oh, well, what about the injuries? I'm sorry, have you watched the last 3 years of DeAndre Hunter and important play? Like, you're not losing anything. So I think it's one of those where maybe you get younger and you bet on that if you're Milwaukee, but that's the best I could come up with is actually like, I don't know if I would hate that as a Hawks fan.
But that's the kind of version of a trade you would need to talk yourself into for Milwaukee is probably the kind of wing prospect who at present leaves you a little bit cold.
Yeah.
And that's a DeAndre Hunter. You brought up Pat Williams in Chicago. Maybe that's another, like, Chicago doesn't have any need for a Chris Middleton, but that kind of player who's like, you can see the appeal of the body type of what they could be, but they haven't put it all together yet. And asking a Giannis Dame team to roll the dice on a player who hasn't put it together yet, and at the cost of Chris Middleton, I think that might just be too steep.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the Raptors, but they're not, like, you just don't have the assets for OG Anunoby. Like, you don't, that's probably the perfect scenario is an OG in that spot, but you just don't have the assets.
Yeah, you're playing for Gary Trent if you're talking to Toronto. That's the kind of market you're looking at.
Goodness gracious. I hate to say it, Rob. I think the Bucks are screwed. I really do. I think they'd be good. I just don't think they can win the title again with this group. I think they're just kind of locked in, just kind of screwed there a little bit.
And it might be that kind of year. Honestly, we've seen that with kind of super teams or kind of super team adjacent constructions in the past, where the first year when you get the star, you kind of have to string it together as you go, but then turn over one season, you get a couple new draft picks you can trade in the coffer, you have a little more optionality, and maybe year two of Giannis and Dame is when things really take off, and year two of Adrian Griffin's coaching career for that matter.
Maybe. You're the ultimate optimist for Milwaukee. I don't know if I'm there. The Pistons, it could be worse. They're just a constant reminder for Milwaukee fans. It could be worse. Detroit's lost 9 straight. Cade's back, which is nice. Killian Hayes is starting, which just every other game causes a mutiny among Pistons fans. I think James Wiseman just might not be a good NBA player. I think we're nearing. He's like an awesome box score checker. Like every morning when I'm going through box scores of games I didn't watch, and I'm like, James Wiseman, 14 minutes. I'm going to go -7 in those 4 days. Like you're just looking and you're like, there's never going to be like a James Wiseman 12 minutes plus 24. You're never going to see that for James Wiseman, I don't think. But I didn't think they'd be this bad. I thought with Monty Williams and with Cade coming back, the East being pretty volatile all across the board, because there's only a couple teams you can really cross off. It's like they can't make the play-in, and it's end of list of Wizards and Pistons, I guess, at this point, because I still think the Hornets, Steve Clifford, I'll never discount regular season Steve Clifford, and
I'm with you.
We'll see on that front. But what do you make of the Pistons and why they've been so bad and are on this horrid losing streak to this point?
I think they just had that kind of moment that a lot of young teams have, where you come out of the gate, you storm out of the gate, really, and you have a lot of talent and a lot of energy, and enough things are kind of breaking in your favor that you're winning or you're staying close in some games. But at a certain point, the opposing teams slow down, and they look around and they say, wait, we don't actually have to guard 3 of these guys behind the arc at a given point in time. Wait, we have a mismatch almost every trip down the floor because of the way Detroit's lineups are being put together right now. And I think a lot of that has come home to roost, in addition to some of the injury absences, which are costing them. Like, this is not a team that's deep enough to withstand injuries, least of all to a player like Cade. Like, he's so important to the bare minimum functioning of their offense. But for now, it's just too cramped, right? They just don't have the spacing for the talent that they have to flourish. And You can see it in their desperation to grab at the nearest shooter they could find, who was Kevin Knox, and Kevin Knox coming in and making an immediate impact. Like, that's how badly they need shooters right now.
I mean, he had the most minutes of anybody, I think, last night. Like, Kevin off the bench, I should say.
Kevin Knox, as someone, position.
Oh my God, like he was a Hawk for a little bit and couldn't. I mean, it was rough. But like you said, I mean, Isaiah Stewart starting at the 4 with Jalen Duren, who I like. Jalen Duren, I think, is gonna be a good player for them. Yeah. But like, I mean, what's the downside of just playing Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham a bunch together? Like, have there, the better. I don't know. Like, are you a Jaden Ivey guy, or are you is he a 6-man type guy more to you? Like, what have you seen from Jaden Ivey with this group? Does he fit next to Cade? Where are you at?
So last season, I thought you saw some really impressive flashes from him. Some moments where it's like, oh, this is an undeniable athletic talent, shot-making talent, the moxie, the change of speed. You could see him being a real difference maker on the ball, trying to create. This year, he has not found a comfortable place in their offense yet. Clearly, Monty Williams does not trust him on the level to want to start him and wants to see something more from him. And there's been some quotes to that effect, which, fair enough. He's a young player. I can understand kind of wanting to put him through the paces a little bit. And Monty is a guy who you have those trials with him as your coach, right? Like he makes you earn it, and then you come around the other side, and there's just like a newfound respect on all sides. Unless you're DeAndre Ayton, apparently, maybe the exception to every rule.
Yeah.
I would like to see Ivey in that starting lineup. I don't really see the logic in starting Killian Hayes, as you alluded to. Especially, I don't see the logic in starting Hayes and Stewart both. If you want to do one of those things, I'm on board. If you're going to make me pick and choose, I'm going to take Isaiah Stewart in that spot, who I think has acclimated himself reasonably well, like made at least enough of his threes to be credible. And we know what he kind of gives you in terms of like effort and physicality and energy and force in that lineup. So I like those things. I don't really like what Killian Hayes adds to that group, and I don't know why you would be punting on one of the more interesting young prospects on your roster for whatever reason Monty Williams is currently punting on Jaden Ivey. So I personally would like to see it. I kind of think eventually we will. If not, it'll either be Ivey or Marcus Sasser in that spot, I think eventually over time. But for now, this is what we got, and this is what the Pistons have. And it's really putting them behind the 8 ball. Like, that starting lineup is getting blitzed in a lot of these games.
And I don't think that's going to change. And you're just kind of like out of it. I think you came into the year with the upgrade, making Monty the highest paid NBA coach. And you're like, there's going to be a bump. There should be a bump. And they might be worse than they were a year ago.
Well, they might get to that bump.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's something to remember about the Monty Williams experience, is that even when the Suns like took off in the bubble, for example, that was a team that kind of like frittered around, like couldn't quite find itself for the majority of that regular season, and then in the right competitive circumstances took off. Yeah. And maybe this is the case where we get to, February, March, and April, and things are starting to really come together for a team that, if we're just being honest, is just super young. And a lot of these guys have not seen significant floor time because of injury. They haven't had a chance to coalesce together at all. And so much of what they're going through defensively just looks like a team that's really raw and really inexperienced and very uncoordinated. Like, there's a lot of defensive standouts, but they're not working together in a way that contributes to productive defense right now.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know if I love any of, do you love Cade? Do you think Cade has first team all NBA potential?
I think he would need to show a lot in terms of consistent shot making. Yeah. And honestly, this is one of the things that's hard to judge, because from what we've seen, he's a very high level playmaker. He's kind of operating in a straitjacket right now. And so what does he look like on a team that has elite level spacing? That could be a totally different kind of setup for him, a totally different proposition that dramatically raises his ceiling as a player. I think in order for him to be an all NBA level guy, he would have to show a significant jump in basically all areas of his game. Not only in the things he does well, but you need something to compensate for the fact that he's never going to be the kind of player who gets to the rim consistently. And so can he draw fouls consistently instead? He hasn't really done that on an every night basis just yet. So there's going to be these trade-offs for him. I think he's an amazingly talented player, but maybe not one who's all NBA at any point in his career.
And then you're just like, man, if you're a Pistons fan, you're like, this, what do we do? You're in that Hornets territory where you're like, well, he was the number 1 overall pick, and then you're trying to get better, so then you're getting further. I mean, I guess next year, but you're like, which of these young guys do you see as you have so many lottery picks now? Thompson, I think, is probably going to be a good player, but he's just more of a role guy, more of a role kind of player. And then you look at Duran, more of a role player. good player, but a role player. And then Jaden Ivey, you're like, man, if you miss on all those in terms of not missing just like they're going to be all bad players, it's just to get that many guys not develop into potentially even worst case scenario, second team All NBA guy in their prime. Like, what are we doing? Like, that's just demoralizing as a fan base because you're like, you would hope at least one of these guys would break out, and I just don't know who that is. I would still bet Cade, but I don't feel great about it.
Yeah.
You know what else I don't feel great about, Rob? As
What's
we wrap up here, the Miami Heat. In terms of them playing the Atlanta Hawks, because that should just be given a win as long as Spo is coaching the Heat. They just know how to put Trey and this group in a blender every time they play. But the Heat are playing really good basketball right now. A lot of people were panicking early on. Were you, first thing, were you an early panicker about the Heat? And also, do you think they're fine and that this is now sustainable and this is more of who they are, a top 4 seed? Because people forget they were a play-in team last year. It's not like everything was smooth sailing, and it's not like the switch flipped and things were awesome in the regular season. I don't know. Where are you at with the Heat?
Yeah, they don't really do smooth sailing.
No,
they sometimes trip and fall over themselves all throughout the regular season, and then they have enough guys who you can count on in the playoffs where it just works out okay. Like they're one of those mystifying teams in that way, and in particular, Jimmy Butler is one of those mystifying players in that way. But I think a lot of what we've seen, to be totally honest, is just good things happen when you go from playing the Celtics and the Timberwolves and the Bucks, even in their current state, to playing the Wizards and the Hornets and the Grizzlies. Like, a lot of that is just schedule regularization over time. But I think the most significant thing to happen on the court right now, and we can say this part quietly so we don't raise too much of a fuss, but they just look better when Tyler Herro is not a part of their starting lineup. And he's been out of the lineup right now with an ankle injury, or at least over the last couple games. With Duncan Robinson in there, they look a lot more functional. They just
why do you think that is?
They look a lot more like themselves. I think the flow of the offense is so much more in tune with the way the Heat want to play and the way that they're best served playing. Herro put up some great individual numbers to start the season, and really in every game he's played for the most part, but it's not a coincidence that when you look at the lineup data, it's like Herro and Butler and Bam on the floor together. That's like a break-even lineup for the most part. When Jimmy and Bam play without him, healthy net positive. Every other combination is losing. And so it's one of those things where you put these two core guys with more shooting, a better combination of defenders too. Like, they've kind of promoted Haywood Highsmith in the rotation too. They've been starting him more, which is nice for their defense. But really the big jump has been going from an awful bottom of the bin offense to start the season to now getting like closer to league average, and their defense is going to be strong enough to overcome an average offense for the most part. So I think just that gain alone, that functionality of having not just another shooter on the floor, but a movement shooter like Robinson, and someone who isn't going to control and dominate the ball quite as much as Herro does, I think it's just better for their flow, to be honest with you.
Does anything look different with Jimmy? Do you see any signs of aging or any kind of just the kind of runs that they've been on the last couple of years kind of weighing on him? Or does he look just like old Jimmy?
He looks like regular season Jimmy to me.
Okay.
Which is to say, every couple games he'll pop off for 25 to 30, and some games he's going to put up like 12 points, and that's going to be okay too, depending on what the rest of your team does, or maybe it's just kind of what it's going to be. But that, for whatever reason, that's the way he is, and I don't know if it's just his game ebbing and flowing as hard as it does, but certainly you can see him just not really care to be a dominant scoring star on a nightly basis, and Miami doesn't really want him to be.
They should do a whole thing where like Draymond intentionally gets thrown out first when Steph's out. Jimmy should actually make it known before the game this is a non-Jimmy game. Like, he should just make it known. We like put it in the. It's not. I'll play. Like, he's like I'll go about the All NBA stuff and like being required to play and not rest. But like, I'll give y'all a heads up. Like, this is a 12-point Jimmy night. Like, just a heads up.
It's an act of protest. At the end of the day.
It's a 12-point Jimmy night. Rob, this was great. What can the good folks check out from you over at the Ringer this week?
Yeah, check us out at theringer.com. All of our NBA staff doing work. I just wrote a feature on Tyrese Halliburton, so you can check that out. And you can check out the Ringer NBA show on Spotify, given that that's our parent company, but also on the podcast platform of your choice if you're so inclined.
But also do Spotify. That's what I do. That's what I listen to. It's the easiest way to go about it.
Highly encouraged.
Yes, there you go. Rob, keep up the great work. Thank you so much for the time, and we'll have to do this again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chase.